Welcome to Let's Talk. Here we will focus on the hustle, the juggle, and everyday struggle of small business. We will be here every week talking to small business owners about their everyday struggles, stresses, and ways they have been able to overcome the challenges of running their business. We welcome questions and comments, so please feel free to email us at admin@plemonscpa.com. We hope you enjoy, and above all, we hope it helps. Well, welcome. Thank you so much. You have joined us. My name is Thalia Williams. I am your hostess for the Hustle, Juggle, and Struggle of Small Business. We are sponsored by Pontum Financial, connecting your financial dots. Today we have in the studio a phenomenal woman. I've met her about 4 years ago, and it has been a journey to say the least, but I am just so honored and privileged to have her here today. Her name is Esther Pipoly from Loss of Life Advocates. Welcome, Esther.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here with you.
Oh, I am so glad to have you here too. So tell me a little bit about yourself and your business. What is Loss of Life Advocates?
Well, Lola stands for my mother's name. She was my first loss in 1999. And I started my business in 2017 after having lost my husband and my dad 63 days apart in 2014. Really fast, really quick. But I went through a lot of struggles with that process of loss. My dad was super prepared. My husband wasn't. I was in the insurance industry for 20 plus years. And after going through a 840-day struggle with an insurance company to settle my husband's life insurance, I look back and said, what did I learn and how can I help other people? And that's kind of how Lola was birthed. So born and raised in San Antonio, attended all Northside Independent School District schools, went to San Antonio College and graduated with a degree in communication, emphasis in public speaking, speech at UTSA here in San Antonio. So born and raised here, really. I had a little bit of a short stint in Denver, Colorado, but for the most part, small business, started out with a dream and an idea, and it's taken people some time to kind of adapt to what I do because I'm not a funeral director and I'm not a professional counselor. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm definitely not a lawyer. I was married to one, but I'm not a lawyer. So what I do is really quarterback and guide people during the scariest and saddest parts of their lives.
True enough. And I understand that one of your questions is that elephant in the room. And that is truly the elephant in the room. And I was just curious, and you mentioned a little bit, why this particular type of service? Why this particular type of product and service? And you alluded to it a little bit. Could you elaborate a little more?
Sure. When you've got wedding planners, and then when you have when you're going to get married and when you're going to have a baby, you have baby showers and you do a lot around the celebration. And when somebody's going to die, you've got all these people from the doctors to the palliative care team to hospice workers and their teams, which they do an excellent job. And then you get over to the funeral directors after somebody passes away. And as soon as your loved one is buried or the services are over, the funeral director usually comes up and taps you on the back and says, we'll be in touch with you as soon as the death certificates come in. And you kind of walk out, and I kind of call it the falling off a cliff, because all of a sudden you're like, well, now what do I do? And nobody's telling you exactly what you need to know, which is, you can't really do anything until the death certificates are there and you have them in hand. If your loved one didn't have a will, here's what you need to do and here's where you need to go. So really the need, I saw it and I felt it immensely after my dad and my husband died, especially my husband, because he was a small business owner here in San Antonio. I had to close down a law practice I knew nothing about. Like I said, I'm not a lawyer, so I was in insurance, and his business was his business, and my business and what I did with the kids was what I did, but we didn't bank together. I wasn't on any of his accounts. So going through that process of what I didn't know, I realized that people really don't know what they don't know, and then all of a sudden somebody passes away, and they're like, now what do I do? So that's really kind of how the niche of this started, with being a consultant. And I was Googling at night after my husband died. I would wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning. I don't know why that's God's hour. Maybe somebody would disagree with me, but 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'd start Googling grief consultant, help me after I've lost my husband. There are a lot of therapists out there and grief counselors, but there's nobody there to say, I've got you. I'm going to hold the flashlight and walk with you down this really dark road. But the light's on the other side, I promise you. So that's kind of where I kind of came up with the out of my own loss and needs and wants of coming up with Lola.
Wow. So what have been some of the challenges in running your business, because you are so niche specific? What have been some of your challenges you've had to contend with?
Yeah, well, in the beginning, everybody said, I do what you do. The financial advisors were like, oh, I have this checklist and I do this and I walk my clients through this. And I'm like, yeah, but you're just one aspect of this. And estate planning attorneys, lawyers would say, well, we do that. We take care of our clients. We get them prepared. And then when there's a loss, we help them. And, the funeral directors would say, well, we do what you do too. And I'm like, no. Let me get something straight. I am not a financial advisor. And that's great. But I'd ask the financial advisor, the attorney, the funeral director, well, with the exception of them. But, hospice workers, are you going with your family that they're a client, right? And there's a relationship there. Are you going to help them clean out a closet, shut down a business? Clean out an office of 20 some odd years. Are you going to go and help witness a body because a widow is scared to go by herself and she doesn't want to take her kids because they're too young, or she doesn't want to expose them to that? Are you going to, step in those scary moments with your client? And most of the time they'll say, well, no, I don't do that. And I'm like, that's exactly what I do. That's where we come in and we try to give the support and the guidance around that. So that struggle was really, it took me a good 2 to 3 years of just talking and explaining and getting better at explaining what I do, and differentiating what somebody else does versus what I do and how we complement each other. That was one struggle. The other struggle is people valuing what I do. So you have an attorney that charges $300 an hour. You have financial planners that charge either a % or sometimes an annual consulting fee. And so kind of pushing myself into that area, it was like, well, how do I price myself? And how do I make it fair and affordable? And by the way, when somebody dies, everybody's got their hand out, from the funeral director to, the flowers to a reception to, the church. Sometimes if you're not a member of the church, they charge to have a mass there,
True.
So you've got cemeteries, all these people that are associated with death. So how do I come in and charge a fair price? So we've struggled with that a little around pricing, because for some people it's not affordable, and for other people it's you're too low,
Mm-hmm.
And so it really is kind of a balance act. So I would say that was a struggle that I've had, between the messaging and figuring out where I fit in the niche, and then also, having to figure out pricing and explaining to people, my value. And it's taken me some time to kind of overcome both of those hurdles.
Oh, I'm sure, because that's the elephant in the room.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody wants to talk about it.
Yeah, nobody wants to talk about it.
Nobody wants to talk about it. So why do you persist? What drives you to keep going?
Oh, gosh. I hate to say, I like being in that area. It's heavy. It's definitely not something for everybody. But I get up every morning and I think about how I felt so alone, so embarrassed, because when my husband died, there were things I didn't know about his business. And I felt like, wow, here we were married for 26 years and I didn't know X, Y, and Z. I felt, just isolated. And I knew that if I wake up every morning, and I felt that way for, a long time, that I want to be there for those people that are grieving and they're sad and they're lonely. And I also want to be a confidential resource. So what drives me is being the person that people turn to. And I guess one of my dreams in the very beginning was walking into a Jim's restaurant here in San Antonio and somebody turning and saying, that's who you go to when you've been diagnosed with something, or you've had a loss, or you can't get over the grief, or you have a friend that's just stuck. That's who you call, because she knows how to get you to the other side. And that's what drives me, is I was wanting to be there. And it's kind of like a ministry in a different way, but it is. And there's some people, flat out, that they come to me and they're so broken. I have partners. So I have therapists, and I have people that are more seasoned and they're educated, and they, they're in that space that I can say, I can help you and take you and triage you. It's kind of like the mom kissing the boo-boo. Yeah. And then it's like, oh, well, we really need to go to the doctor now because you need stitches or you need more attention. So I can get them over to professionals. But yeah, it drives me to get up every day and say, who am I going to help today?
Wow. And that's amazing, because I've been in that position with my mom and my dad. And it's overwhelming not to have some sort of support. And you kind of go into autopilot. It's like, okay, what do I need to do? I need to make the donuts. I need to call this person. I need to do that person. I need to do this. I need to do that. But then once it's all over with, you go, whew. Then you have the reality of, there's still more to do because you can't claim the insurance without that death certificate. You can't close this account without that death certificate. You can't do a lot without that death certificate. And then when you're going to the funeral home or to the cremation place, you never know how many death certificates to order.
Exactly.
Something simple like that because you're like on autopilot sometimes or you're so numb depending on how the transition occurred, whether it was sudden, whether it was long term. And with the pandemic coming, you may not even have that last opportunity to say goodbye or get any information out of that. So, that gap filling is quite critical. I like that. We have Chris Hall from Pontum Financial here in the studio. Let's talk about business transitions. What is that exactly?
Most of the business owners, whenever we meet them, they've worked for decades to build a business or a product or a service, and they never really gave too much thought to what the out is. Every business owner gets started. That should be one of the primary things that they consider. They should have different outs planned at different intervals, but let's be realistic. We don't really do that, myself included. So whenever you start to think about business transition, it's going to be one of several things. It could be retirement. It could be just wanting to get out of the business and do something else. It could be transitioning it to a family member or keeping it in the family. And those are some of the crucial conversations that you need to have with both family and yourself, frankly, to see what you want. Some business owners want to continue a legacy. They want that name to be carried on. So that really has an impact on sale of the business unless it's to only family, which maybe your sons or daughters have a problem with that as well. They may not like the name. All these things run through a business owner's mind numerous times throughout the day, and most of them just never know what first step to take.
Well, if we want information, how can we reach out to you?
Our phone number is 210-625-4845. You can look at our website. It's pontumfinancial.com, P-O-N-T-E-M financial.com, or you can find us on LinkedIn and Facebook.
Chris Hall is a partner with Pontum Financial and offers securities and investment products and services through Waddell & Reed, Inc., WRI, member FINRA/SIPC. Pontum Financial is a separate entity from WRI. So how critical is support to you?
Support in which way when you say that?
We talk about support. We talk about mentally, emotionally, physically, financially, spiritually, business-wise, support itself.
Yeah. On a personal level, I can say that support is everything, who you circle yourself with, and sometimes people come in and out of that circle. It's not a circle of trust, but it's just, important to have your team around you and the people that drive you and that make you feel good. Support for other people. It's good that people know that they have somebody they can go to. And I learned really quickly on when my husband died. He told me, don't worry about it. I've got a good team around me. There was only one person out of all of his friends and the people that officed with him that took me under their wing and said, I got you. And that was his CPA. His CPA kept me from writing checks that I wasn't supposed to write for his business. I mean, I was trying to keep my husband's name in good taste, because he was a business owner. And so there were a lot of people that were like, well, what about this? And what about that? Clients calling and vendors that he had relationships with. So I learned really quickly on that when you go through a loss, support is super important to have a team around you. And sometimes even going outside of your normal team, your family team, because there are things that you encounter that are a little embarrassing, or you're like, I don't know that. So being able to come to somebody that can support you, like us at Lola, to be able to be that trusted resource for you is important. But on a personal level, I will say that I have a tremendous support network that I can lean on. And I just got through being sick, and it was really nice to be able to not only have my kids and my good friends, but people checking in on me. Everybody wanted to feed me, and I was like, I'm not hungry. But you find out your support network. And again, some people that were there for me 6 years ago when my husband passed away, 6.5 years ago, are not the same people. Right. It was a different support network.
So it was a season.
It was, yeah.
You know, and like you say, there are some people that are there for a season, some are there for a reason.
Right.
And depending on what their purpose is, they will either linger or they'll fall off and disappear because their purpose has been served. So tell us a little bit about a failure that you learned from running Lola. Just one.
Just one. I was like, just one. I will say, and this is how you and I met, the biggest failure I had was hiring consultants that I probably didn't need. The biggest failure was that I didn't know about Lift Fund until I was almost into my second or almost my third year of business. I didn't know that there were a lot of small business for women, resources out there for entrepreneurial women. And that to me was a failure on my part, that I just quickly, I went to one person and said, hey, I have this idea. And the branding guy that I used was amazing. He still is. He's a very good friend, and I respect him. And he did a great job with my brand. But then I ended up hiring coaches that probably weren't in the right. I wasn't ready. They weren't ready. We weren't ready for each other. Okay. So that failure of like really bringing in people at the wrong space and spending money on things that I probably should have waited on. And there were some people, I will say my son, would tell me, I don't think we're ready for that, but do what you want to do. You're the company CEO, So a lot of times I would listen to what I thought was right at that time, but I really wish I would have leaned into Lift Fund, heard about that earlier, and been able to get there first, because I think, Janie Barrera and her team there, they do an amazing job of taking women, especially at the Women's Business Center, and just holding them and saying, okay, you need this, you need this, you need this, this is what you need to know for financial and CPA. And that was to me kind of the biggest failure of not really taking the time to research my community.
And that's what you don't know, what you don't know.
Exactly.
And that is a perfect example of recognizing what you don't know that you don't know.
Right.
And then finding it, when you do find it, you kick yourself in the head, go like,
oh, I could have saved a bunch of money and
I
time.
had a VA.
Exactly.
True enough. Wow. Well, that's good, because Lift Fund here in San Antonio, and it's across the southern part of the country, is an amazing resource for financial guidance, for grants, for education. And we are very fortunate to have Lift Fund and the Women's Business Center here in San Antonio.
Exactly.
So kudos to them. Guys, if you're listening, kudos to you.
Many thanks over and over.
Undoubtedly. So tell us about a success you've learned from.
Learning how to be a salesperson. So my background for 20 plus years was in account management. And I took care of people. I had checklist. I still have checklist. I was the person that people went to for support. Get me through this, HR people, professionals. So learning how to ask people for money was hard for me, and I feel like that's been something I've been getting better at and becoming more successful at, because it is really that transaction when somebody's at that point when they're sad, and having to say, okay, so this is how I invoice. This is how my services work, and not be afraid. In the beginning, I was giving away a lot because I just didn't know how to ask for money.
The close,
right? And that to me is a big success of being able to get that to where now I know my company is on the right track. Okay. So that was a success. And then also all the people I've met. Right. We wouldn't have met.
True.
Right.
Very
so
true.
All the people that have come in my life because of the hard work and that see it, because there's some days when you don't even see your own success. So people to remind me, hey, what you're doing is good. And my daughter's always like, oh, Mom, you're much better than you think. Overcoming that imposter syndrome, because it's super big, especially with women, it's something that we have to consistently fight. So really getting better at overcoming the imposter syndrome, reminding myself that I'm valuable. And then also, being able to associate that value with what I do and being able to ask people for, for invoicing.
Right.
Can you pay me, please, so I can keep my business going?
Exactly. And the niche that you're in is already difficult, because emotionally they're literally strung out because they've had this loss, or their loved one is getting ready to transition and they're not prepared. And the challenge becomes emotionally for them, where are they? And you're like, oh, well, you want something, you want something, you want something, you want something. Yes, but in order for all of those people to stay in business, they're going to ask you for
Right.
something. But you need someone to help mitigate that, and that's where you come in at.
Exactly.
That's excellent. That's excellent. So what does success look like to you? What do you see as success?
Oh, having people that train underneath me, like train more people to do what I'm doing and have them go out into the world and do what I'm doing. That to me is success, really kind of growing Lola in a way that organically the right people come in and they want to help people during this time, a period of their life and a life transition, and being able to look back and say, I created this little army of people that weren't there before, that we're serving, we created something that serves a purpose, and that I can, look back and say, all these people are wonderful humans. And a lot of times the people that come to me, they're like, I've been taking care of my parent, or I've been taking care of all these people. I didn't realize this was a thing. And being able to say, you have a gift, because it is a gift. And here's how we can get you trained up and ready to go. And yeah, success for me actually would be if I was able to work with more corporations, because based on my own personal experience as an employee, it was horrible. My boss didn't know what to say or how to say it, and she was awkward and I was awkward, and I have to look back on it now and think, she just didn't know any better. She didn't know what she didn't know, kind of again. But success would be to work with more corporations for me and be able to say, look, based on what happened to me, let me help you really make your place the best place to work. I mean, when we see that list that comes out with the Business Journal, the best place to work, and I'm like, well, it's the best place to work is when there's a transition for an employee or a loss, and how that employer reacts to it. Because if you want to keep that employee and they're valuable, you've already spent money on getting them trained up, and you've got equity in them, but getting them through that period of really difficult times will either keep the employee, or if your failure to do that will make the employee leave.
Well, you mentioned when we were off record about a situation where an employer was concerned about an employee. Could you go into that just a little bit?
I've got several different stories, because lately I have a large employer. It's a federal credit union here in San Antonio, and they call me almost every month. They have an employee that has a loss, and they actually have turned over, their trust of that employee to me at that time of loss or that life transition. So I've got a federal credit union here that helps with that. But I recently had an employer that called me and said, I have an employee that she just doesn't know how to get off the floor. Like, she lost her grandmother at this point. She's just been consistently coming to work, and it hasn't been pleasant. She's kind of a disruption to the rest of the team. And so they called me and said, we're wanting her to meet with you, because we don't want to tell her, you need to go get mental health help. So what they use me as the buffer. So I come in and I ask the employee, well, what's going on? Like, tell me why you're hurting. And then they start explaining to me, and I'm like, and this is confidential. And they start explaining to me their hurts and where they're having pain. And then with their permission, I can either go back to HR or to the employer and say, here's what the situation is. And they go, oh, well, we didn't even realize that. Especially now with COVID, right?
Correct.
But you have an employer that doesn't want to have to say to somebody, you need to access your mental health benefits. So how do you do that in a way that is gentle?
And won't cause a lawsuit.
Exactly. There's so many rules around that and laws. So they're able to use me and my organization as kind of that middle ground to help that person. And we either come in and we triage it, and we're able to help them get access in, because my 20 years of employee benefits background as an account manager, I'm able to word things in a way with, hey, would you be willing and open to going and talking to a professional? You don't have to, but I can get you to other resources. And 99% of the time the employee says, well, yeah, I'd be happy to do that. But when you're in an employer-employee situation, it kind of, the employee can be like, I'm fine, because
they want to keep their job.
They want to keep their job. So, yeah, but that's only one example. I mean, for me, I was on the floor of the bathroom at where I was working after my husband died, and my boss just didn't know how bad I was hurting, and she just didn't realize that the words that she was using were not the right words, and so it really did create hard feelings, because I felt like I wasn't supported, and she felt like, it's been like 6 weeks. You should kind of be over this now, So Yeah, she just didn't know.
Right.
Again.
And any loss, you just won't be over in 6 weeks, no matter what it is, because the grief is a process, and everybody processes it differently.
Right.
There are different stages of grief. You have the shock, you have the anger, you have all of those emotions, and they don't just, 6 weeks, this emotion is going to stop, and then the next one's going to start. And 12 weeks later, that one's going to stop, and the next one's going to start. No, they come in waves. They do, and they come in stages. And as you said, she didn't know how to handle it because she may not have ever dealt with it herself personally.
Well, and she was, I look back on it now because it's 6.5 years removed, but, I look back on it and I remember her being like, hey, and it was before my husband and my dad were really kind of sick. And she said, I'm just not the person you come to with an emotional issue. She knew her strengths and her weaknesses, and she called him out. And she tried when I came back. It was a double loss because I'd been back and forth, taking care of my dad. Then my dad died, and I thought, okay, I'm going to be that exemplary employee now. And then my husband got sick, and then it was just kind of a nosedive, and they just didn't know how to handle it. So I look back on it and thinking, well, she just didn't know what she didn't know, and she didn't know any better. I'm a big believer in the grief recovery method. I'm certified through them. And part of that process is forgiving people for really not knowing. It's a different type of forgiveness. It's acknowledgement and it's forgiveness. And so that's a big part of having to move past that so that I can help other employers see that, hey, based on what I went through, you don't want anybody to ever have to do that.
Undoubtedly. So if you had to do it all over again, what would you do differently, if anything?
Business model wise?
Yes, we'll stick with the business model.
Okay. So, and somebody's probably going to steal this idea.
maybe not.
Okay. So if I would have known, I would have bought a storage facility, and the Lola offices would have been in the storage facility. But when a professional dies, one of the things that they're kind of having to do is store their documents for a certain amount of time. So my husband was 7 years. So we had to find a place to store his legal files, or copies of them, and so holding on to that information, people, after somebody dies, and if you have to move like I did, I was not in San Antonio, I was in Denver, Colorado. His office was in San Antonio. Our home was in San Antonio. Had to sell the house, but we moved everything out of his office into the house. And then when the house sold, I had to move it from the house to another place. So it's just kind of you have to hold on to it in case a client calls or somebody calls and says, I need that file, right? So for most professionals, they have to store this information. Doctors, engineers, architects, dentists, and lawyers, just to name a few. So I would have gotten a storage unit, and I would have provided that space for professional space. And then I would have had a scanning company to scan all their information so that the estate can have the information, and then a shredding company to shred. So if I had to do it all over again, and again, it's a business model for somebody out there, but I would have had Lola in there, because that to me is when Carl died, I was calling up Marge Churchill from the Bar Association here in San Antonio, and her and I said, we'll never forget each other, because I think I called her 20 times. Like, what do I do with this? What do I do with this? What do I do with this? And she said, we don't store. The Bar Association does not store files for attorneys. So when you have an attorney that passes away, or a professional, that's just one of the things that you're telling the family. Okay, so where in your house do you have to move all of that stuff, or how are you going to liquidate the business or succession plan it over to somebody else? So if I had to say what I would have done differently, looking back, now that I know kind of more of what people need, that would have been something I would have developed, and it would have changed things a little bit because my SKU would have been a little bit different. But to me, it was like that. I was looking for help. Where do I store this stuff? And 26 years of a law practice. Yeah, it was a full office.
I'm sure. And amongst everything that was going on, storing files was not in the top 10. Not even close.
Right.
Probably instinctively you knew it, but application of it amongst everything else that was going on, emotionally, physically, financially, all that sort of stuff, it's just like, I got to move it from here, from point A to point B to point C, and it just didn't click.
Right.
To store this someplace. Let's just move it. Let's keep it all together because we have to.
Right.
Just out of the IRS mindset, we got to keep everything for at least 7 years.
Exactly.
But just the comprehension of maybe if I find a storage unit to put it in, so I don't have to keep moving it all the time.
Right. And that's for even houses, like, when people have to liquidate their house and, if they have to get rid of stuff really quick. I mean, and I hate to say that, but I mean, families, right now, especially with COVID, if one person, if the breadwinner passes away, then the rest of the family's going, okay, can we continue to move on the way we did before? So there's a lot that goes, there's a lot of moving pieces that go into that. And that's kind of what we do at Lola, is kind of manage the pieces that are all moving at the same time. And a lot of times it's like a teacher here in San Antonio, her school district had referred her to me. And I said, let me see if I can get the life insurance assigned for you at the funeral home. So she gave me the funeral home. I called up the life insurance company. I talked to the school district, and we were able to, I said, this is what I can take off of your plate right now. That was her most urgent thing. I just don't have the money to pay for the funeral for my husband. He had died of COVID. And I said, you know what? Let me see what I can do. And because of my benefits background, I was able to make those phone calls and get it assigned. So she didn't have to worry about it. She had to come up with the money for the cemetery, but not have to worry about the funeral because of the life insurance. So I was able to help in that situation. But people, and she told me, that's all I need you to do is help me with that right now so I can be with my kids. And sure enough, got an email like 2 weeks later. If I look back on that whole thing, and I didn't have to write a check. I was going to have to wait for the life insurance anyway. So, it was just a little bit, she had to give up a little bit of a percentage, but she's like, just to have you paid for and to do that for me so I could be with my kids and we could grieve, that's relief. Huge.
That's relief right there. And for some people, that's all they need, because of the myriad of things that are already going on, the emotional upheaval. Yeah. And then when you have young children, and I'm talking about any child that's under the age of 10, not saying that the ones that are older than that are less challenging, but, a lot of the ones that are under the age of 10 are not as self-sufficient as an 11 through 18-year-old. So that parent who's left is like, okay, I need to focus on them as well. And then also handle the business of the death, the transition. Right. And I need that trusted person because family isn't always it.
And it does become a business.
Yes.
After somebody passes away. I mean, because the closing down of everything becomes you're grieving, and then it's having to make business decisions. And I will say that I made a lot of financial mistakes after my husband died just because I wanted it to go away. So I was like, if I pay you money, will you go away? Oh, okay, good.
Go away.
Go away. Let me write a check. And again, the CPA was the one that was like, you don't need to write them a check. They're just, you're vulnerable and they're taking advantage of you. And there were people that did that to me after my husband died. So again, the driving force.
Right. Totally understand. So any advice for our audience?
Oh, yeah. Get prepared. I mean, we didn't learn anything in 2020. It was, when businesses had to shut down and employees had to be let go or furloughed. I mean, that word furlough, that was like a new word, right? People are like, what does that mean? Do I still get paid? No, you get to go home. And if my business opens up, then I get to pay you again. But yeah, we didn't learn anything. The one thing I would say from 2020, other than, wear a mask and, wash your hands and all the things that they were telling us to do, have your affairs in order. And if you don't have your affairs in order, then call somebody, call us, call an attorney, call somebody that's going to at least get your basic will, medical power of attorney, financial power of attorney, and sit down and have the conversation with your family. Look at where things are at. Where is everything? When people say, we've got everything, it's all prepared, I always ask them, where's your will? Like, where's the original will? And they're like, oh, well, it's in my file cabinet. Well, who else knows that? Nobody. So, so families can look for days looking for a will, or it's in the shoebox in the closet underneath a pile of this, So it's those conversations. So I said, just have a conversation, get prepared. I mean, by all means, we have comprehensive packages for people if they want to get prepared. But at the same time, I always just say, just start with the basics. Sit down with your family and say, here's what you need to know in case something happens to me. And I just listened to a really good friend of mine, a COVID survivor. He was one of the first in San Antonio that was hospitalized and went through the horrible process, ICU for weeks. His story was just so powerful when I listened to it. And he talked about he made a death video. He goes, I had a conversation with my wife. I knew I was going to the hospital. I probably was going to die. And I made a death video for my my siblings because I wanted them to know how I felt about them. And I thought, wow, how powerful. But even him, he was like, yeah, I wish I wasn't having to make that conversation, like have that conversation at that time. So the powerful thing you can do of love for your family is really to sit down with them and say, this is kind of like a 20-minute conversation. We can go over, but y'all need to know where certain things are at. And for business owners especially, you know, what did you learn last year that you can carry on this year? And I've been working with business professionals prior to COVID and getting them prepared and having certain protocols in place and packages in place for their employees. So those people were calling me up and saying, oh, gosh, thank God I worked with you 2 years ago and had a little faith in you because I was a baby business and telling them you need to get prepared. And it was based off of what I did with my husband's office and trained them. And they were like, yeah, we were, it was still hurt to have to shut our doors, but it hurt just a little bit less knowing that we had something to go by.
Gotcha. Wow. Well, tell us, how can we get a hold of you? How can we reach you and get more information or more details?
Sure. So the website, lossoflifeadvocates.com is the website. And then the phone number is 210-802-2224 and email info@lossoflifeadvocates.com. That's how you get me.
Wow.
And I do answer my phone. That was
you do.
Oh yeah, that was when I have a coach up in New Jersey, and she was like, "Stop answering your phone." And I was like, "No, I mean, sometimes I answer the phone and I have somebody crying on the other side." And so for me, it's hard to let that go because there's nothing more powerful than being able to call. If you called up to Graham Weston's office, you're not going to get Graham Weston. You're going to get somebody before you. But how powerful would that be to be like, "This is Graham Weston," or "This is whoever the CEO is."
I'd be shocked at the moment, probably.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I've been trying to meet him. I'm like, he's on my list for 2021 to meet.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. Well, Esther, we're so glad to have you. We value the information you've given us, and I hope our audience takes to heart your theme of being prepared, not being blindsided. That elephant in the room is going to come.
And they're so cute. Everybody looks at baby elephants all the time. They're not that scary, I promise.
Undoubtedly. Well, we want to thank you for being on our show today.
Oh, thank you.
We appreciate it. And once again, if you are interested in lossoflifeadvocates.com, Esther Pipoly, thank you. And we want you to have a very good day.
Thank you. Stay warm.
Yes. For more information about any of our guests, or if you have questions and comments, please email us at admin@PlemonsCPA.com. And don't forget to check out our website, PlemonsCPA.com, for upcoming events and workshops in San Antonio.
David B Plemons CPA Inc. is providing this podcast as a public service, but it is neither a legal interpretation nor a statement of David B Plemons CPA Inc. policy. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by David B Plemons CPA Inc. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the Hustle, Juggle, and Struggle of Small Business podcast does not imply an endorsement of them or their concepts or any entity they represent. Views and opinions expressed by David B Plemons CPA Inc. employees are those of the employees and do not necessarily reflect the views of David B Plemons CPA Inc. or any of its officials. You should always consult your own investment advisors, attorneys, and accountants before making any decisions concerning your financial matters. If you have any questions about this disclaimer, please contact our office.